on a topic that I'm very passionate about, sleep, and why sleep is vital to our health, why it's vital to our general well-being. We know that there's almost no physiologic process in the body that isn't influenced by sleep. We know that in order to optimize our health, we need good sleep. We also know that 1 in 3 people are not getting the sleep that they require. We live in a busy society that doesn't prioritize sleep because we have a lot going on. Sleep was once thought of as a very passive state, a state of inactivity, a state of non-wakefulness. But we do know that sleep is a very active state. Its brain activity is very active during sleep, and it's vital to our well-being. And so during this talk, what I hope to convey to you is why sleep is important and why it's important to prioritize enough time for sleep. And I like to begin with this quote that says, if sleep didn't serve a vital function, it is the biggest mistake evolution ever made. This is because we spend a third of our lives sleeping. And it's also a vulnerable state. We have decreased awareness, we have decreased responsiveness to our surroundings. And so if it wasn't vital, it would serve no evolutionary benefit. We know that sleep is preserved across many different species. Many species exhibit some form of sleep. In humans, we have 2 main stages of sleep. We have the rapid eye movement sleep and the non-rapid eye movement sleep. And rapid eye movement sleep derives its name from what we observe ourselves doing when we're in the stage of sleep. We have very rapid eye movements. And in non-rapid eye movements sleep, we don't have these rapid eye movements. So non-REM sleep is divided into N1, N2, and N3 stages of sleep. And we cycle between these 2 periods of sleep as the night progresses. So this is what we call a hypnogram. A hypnogram allows us to visualize how we cycle between the different stages of sleep. On the x-axis, we have the hours of sleep, and on the y-axis, we have the different stages. What happens when we first start the night is we're in stage W, which is wakefulness, and then we descend into N1, which is a very light stage of sleep, and then N2 and N3, N3 being the deepest stage of sleep that we have, and then we go into REM sleep. The first REM period is very short, as you can see on the gram. And then as the night progresses, the REM periods get longer and longer and longer. We spend the first half of our night mostly in non-REM sleep, and we cycle between REM and non-REM every 90 minutes to 120 minutes. And we have about 4 to 5 cycles per night. So it's important to get adequate sleep, so we make sure we cycle through different stages of sleep adequately. So now I'm going to go and talk in more depth about the different stages of sleep. We know that N1 is the very light stage of sleep. You can think of N1 as a transition between wakefulness and sleep, and it makes up a very small percentage of our 5% of our total sleep time. And during this stage of sleep, our brain waves start to slow down, our vital signs start to slow down, and we're transitioning into deeper stages of sleep. In N2, it's a deeper stage of sleep compared to N1, but lighter compared to N3 stage of sleep. And we spend most of our sleep in N2 sleep. We spend about 50% of our sleep in N2 sleep. And N2 sleep is important because it serves several functions. One major important function is that it helps to maintain and build muscle memory. So muscle memory, we need muscle memory when we're learning a new sport or learning a musical instrument. We need the stage of sleep to facilitate this learning. Uh, N2 sleep also preps the brain for next day learning. So if you have an exam coming up or you have to learn something the following day, you want to make sure you get good sleep. And N2 sleep will prepare you for next day learning. It also helps to integrate memory. Then N3 sleep is the deepest stage of sleep. It is the last stage of non-REM sleep. It is also known as slow wave sleep or deep sleep or delta sleep. And the reason why we call it slow wave sleep is that our brain waves slow down. They slow down to about 4 hertz, which is very slow, but they have very high amplitude, slow brain activity. And during this stage, it is difficult to arouse out of. It's difficult to awaken out of this sleep. It has a very high arousal threshold. So when you do wake up out of this stage of sleep, you will feel groggy, you will feel drowsy. That's normal. It is also we spend about 13 to 23% of our time in N3 sleep. It's very short. And as we get older, it gets shorter and shorter. This stage of sleep is important for growth and repair. This is the stage of sleep where growth hormone is released. So in individuals who exercise or have a lot of wear and tear, you want to make sure that you get enough sleep so you can have repair of muscles that break down. Also, growing children, they need this stage of sleep predominantly because they're still growing and we have this growth hormone that's released during this stage of sleep. So N3 sleep is also important for moving our memories from short-term memories into long-term memories. It helps to consolidate our memories. But it's also a period where we forget. So memories that are not necessary, memories that we don't need to keep are eliminated during this stage of sleep to make room for new memories that we will acquire during the day. So, the stage of sleep serves, to consolidate memory, but also to remove unnecessary information. And then the last stage of sleep, which is REM sleep. REM sleep is totally different from the other stages of sleep because, in the other stages of sleep, we have slowing of brain activity, we have slowing of our vital signs, our heart rate decreases, respiratory rate decreases, blood pressure decreases. But during REM sleep, we see the opposite. Our brain activity increases. And when we look at our brain waves during this stage of sleep, it actually resembles wakefulness. So our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up, respiratory rate goes up. And this is the stage of sleep that we have our very vivid, complex dreams. We dream in other stages of sleep, but during REM sleep is where we have these dreams that we remember the next day, and sometimes they're very bizarre. And to prevent us from enacting our dreams, we're usually paralyzed. So our muscles lose tone during REM sleep, so we don't act out our dreams. And so if you have a condition such as sleep apnea, you might have more events during REM sleep because you don't have tone during the stage of sleep. This stage of sleep is important for perceptual learning, creative problem solving, emotional memory consolidation. So you may have a problem during the day, and then when you go to sleep, you wake up, and you find new solutions to your problems. REM sleep facilitates creative problem solving. It also facilitates emotional processing when we're sleeping. So if you had a traumatic emotional event during the day, you feel terrible about the event, you might wake up in the morning feeling a little bit better about that event. And that's because during REM sleep, we process these emotions that we encounter, these experiences that we encounter during the day. And we're better able to handle these events when we experience them in the future. So now that I've talked about, the different stages of sleep, the non-REM sleep, REM sleep, and the different stages of non-REM sleep, I want to move on and talk about what controls our ability to fall asleep. How are we awake at certain times of the day and asleep at other times of the day? We know that sleep is not a voluntary process. It is a process that's controlled by two things. The process S, which we call the homeostatic drive for sleep, and the circadian rhythm. So the homeostatic drive for sleep is like sleep pressure. There's a chemical that builds up in the brain called adenosine. The longer we're awake, the more active we are, the more mental activity we're performing. This chemical builds up in the brain and causes us to feel sleepy. When we go to sleep, this chemical is washed out of the brain and we wake up with a clean slate. And then as the day progresses, this chemical builds up in the brain, and the more it builds up, the sleepier we become. Then we have the circadian rhythm. This is a 24-hour cycle of sleep and wakefulness. And the circadian rhythm is controlled by an internal clock. So we all have an internal clock known as a suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it's located deep in the brain. And the way that the suprachiasmatic tells time is that it entrains itself to the external 24-hour day cycle with using certain cues. There are cues known as time givers that signal the suprachiasmatic nucleus, that tell the suprachiasmatic nucleus what time of day it is. So certain time givers are light, social activities, physical activities, meals, temperature are examples of time givers. But the strongest time giver that we have is light. So when it's daytime, we're exposed to light, and then light hits our retina and signals the internal clock, the master clock, that it's daytime. And so we're prepared and ready to do activities that we normally do during the day. When the sun goes down and it's dark outside, the suprachiasmatic nucleus' internal clock knows that it's darkness, and so it releases a hormone called melatonin. And what melatonin does is it signals the rest of the body that it's time to go to sleep. And so these two processes work together to control when we go to bed and when we're awake. So on the top portion of this picture, we have the sleep drive, or the homeostatic drive for sleep. So when we first wake up in the morning, adenosine, the sleep chemical, is washed out of the brain and we're awake. Also, there's daylight, there's sunshine, and so their circadian rhythm is alerting and saying it's daytime, it's time to be awake. But as the day progresses, this sleep chemical builds up in the brain, and it pushes us towards sleepiness. But we don't fall asleep in the middle of the day because the circadian alerting signal counters the effects of this sleep drive. But at nighttime, when the sun is down and melatonin is released, we no longer have the circadian drive to be awake. And coupled with this increasing sleep chemical in the brain, we're able to fall asleep very easily. And that's why we're awake during the day and we fall asleep at nighttime. So now that we know the different stages of sleep, we know what controls our ability to stay awake and to fall asleep. I'm going to talk about sleep requirements. How much sleep do we require as people, as adults? Our sleep requirements decrease as we get older. So when we start off as newborns, we spend about half of our day sleeping. And when we become adults, we require about 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And obviously, there are people who require less, and there are people who require more. But very few people require less than 6 hours of sleep per night. Um, when we're much older, 65 and above, the sleep requirement's usually around 7 to 8. It's usually still about the same as a young adult. However, there's significant changes to our sleep that happen when we're much older. And some of the changes that happen are we have more fragmented sleep, we have less deep sleep, slow wave sleep, and we don't produce as much melatonin anymore. So our sleep phase might also change. But overall, as adults, we require about 6 to 7 hours, 7 to 9 hours of sleep per, per night. But what we know is that there are a lot of people who aren't getting that amount of sleep every night. The National Sleep Foundation estimates that about 47 million people are not getting the sleep that they require. And this can have serious consequences. So I'm going to talk next about some of the consequences that we face when we're sleep deprived, when we don't get enough sleep. So this was a study that was performed comparing alcohol consumption to sleep loss. And what they found was that individuals who slept only 6 hours performed had similar performance results to individuals who consumed 2 to 3 cans of beer. So looking at sedation, looking at performance, looking at memory, individuals who slept 4 hours per night had the same scores as individuals who consumed about 5 to 6 cans of beer. And individuals who had no sleep at all had similar scores to individuals who consumed 10 to 11 cans of beer. So that's significant impairment. The interesting thing about chronic sleep deprivation or sleep deprivation is that the more sleep deprived you are, the less likely you are to be aware of your impairments. So there was a study that showed that individuals who were sleep deprived for about 3 days lost the ability to accurately assess how impaired they were. And so this could be problematic. You know, if you're sleeping, you're impaired, and you're not aware that you're actually impaired, then it does pose a lot of consequences for safety, particularly driving. Another event that we all experience and will be experiencing soon is daylight savings. And what some studies have shown is that that 1 hour that we lose during spring has significant consequences. So one study looked at medical errors, and what they found was that medical errors due to human factors increased by 19% when we lost that 1 hour of sleep during spring, and we didn't see that same effect in fall when we gained an hour of sleep. Also, there's increased rates of heart attacks, increased car accidents, increased rates of suicide just from losing that 1 hour of sleep. And this is why the American Academy of Sleep Medicine is advocating for us to end daylight savings, because it does have a lot of consequences to our general well-being, to our safety, etc. And there is also a lot of evidence suggesting that impaired sleep does affect our health. There was a study that looked at heart disease and impaired sleep. It was a huge study that followed about 70,000 women from 1986 to 1996. And what they found in 1996, we were looking for occurrence of cardiovascular conditions, cardiovascular disease. And what they found was that individuals who slept less than 5 hours per night had about 45% increased rate of heart disease compared to individuals who slept 8 hours per night, which is very significant. We also know that impaired sleep decreases our ability to fight infections. There was a study that also looked at antibody titers after vaccination. And what they found was that individuals who were sleep deprived had fewer antibodies after vaccination compared to individuals who were not sleep deprived. We also know that impaired sleep affects our ability to fight cancer. The WHO has named shift work a probable carcinogen for this particular reason. We also know that during sleep is when we clear metabolic waste from the brain. Pathologic proteins are removed from the brain. And what we find is that when the individual is sleep deprived, there's more buildup of waste material, there's more buildup of pathologic proteins that are associated with dementia, Alzheimer's dementia. So it is important to optimize our sleep, to make sure that we're getting enough sleep so that we can reap the benefits of sleep, but also prevent some of the consequences that I've just mentioned. And so how do we optimize our sleep? So the next slides, I'm just going to talk about how we can optimize our sleep. So optimizing our sleep, the first tip that I have is to treat any condition that impairs your sleep. Some of the most common sleep conditions are sleep-related breathing disorders, known as sleep apnea, obstructive sleep apnea. So if you or you know someone who snores and has daytime consequences, is tired and sleepy during the day, even though they've had adequate time in bed, it could be a sign that they have sleep apnea. Also, if you're someone that has difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, and has daytime consequences, this could be an indication that maybe you need help in helping you sleep better. Other sleep conditions are Rem sleep behavior disorders, parasomnias, circadian rhythm disorders. If you find yourself to be an extreme night owl, it might be a sign of a circadian rhythm disorder. And you can always talk to a sleep specialist or talk to your primary or healthcare provider to help you manage these conditions. Another tip, my second tip, is to wake up the same time every day, even on weekends. If you want to optimize your sleep, you want to regulate the timing of your circadian rhythm. You want to regulate this master clock, internal clock that we have. And the best way to do it is to go to bed the same time every day and wake up the same time every day. But the easiest way to do this is to wake up the same time every day. And the reason for that is if you wake up the same time every day, you will get sleepy around the same time every day. And so you'll probably be going to bed at a more consistent time. So wake up. It is important to have a set wake up time, which will help to regulate your sleep time as well. Another, my tip number 3 is setting aside sufficient time for sleep, but not spending excessive time in bed. So we call this sleep efficiency. So the amount of time you spend in bed shouldn't be more than 30 to 45 minutes. When you're in bed, you should be sleeping, and other activities should be performed outside of bed. So the bed is for sleep and intimacy, I like to say, and other activities such as watching television in bed or doing work in bed or worrying should be done outside of the bed or bedroom. And the reason for that is in people who have difficulty falling asleep, particularly people who have difficulty falling asleep, is that you will create an association between your bed and not sleeping. And so if you're someone who likes to watch television in bed, when you get into bed, your mind and your brain is programmed to want to watch TV. If you're someone who likes to worry in bed, when you get into bed, that's what you will do as opposed to sleeping. So if you want to optimize your sleep, set aside enough time for sleep, but don't spend excessive amount of time in bed doing other things. Um, this will help tremendously. And tip number 4 is to avoid screen time and stimulating activities before bedtime. And the reason for that is, as I mentioned earlier, our internal clock receives cues from the external world to regulate our circadian rhythms. So if you're exposed to bright lights, to screens, to gadgets, particularly gadgets that emit blue light, what will happen is your internal clock will receive mixed signals. It will think that it's daytime because it's receiving this powerful light signal, telling it that this is a time to be awake. And so what will happen is the time that melatonin is released will be delayed, and when that happens, you are most likely to fall asleep at a later time, probably at a time that you don't desire. So avoid screen time before bed. Also avoid stimulating activities such as, watching a stimulating television show before bedtime. That could, increase your sympathetic response. If you're watching something that is um, anxiety provoking or very stimulating, it might cause you to have difficulty falling asleep. So I like to advise have a wind down routine, have a routine that you implement about an hour to 2 hours before bedtime, where you start to turn off the lights, you turn off your gadgets. If you watch TV, you start to turn off the TV, you dim your lights at this time. If you're someone who likes to take a shower, you do so at this time. If you like to drink something warm, you do so at this time. If you like to meditate and relax, you do so at this time. And what this does is it signals the brain that it's almost time for bed. Usually we release melatonin about 2 hours before our ideal bedtime. Okay, and so if you're turning off the lights or dimming down the lights around 2 hours before bedtime, and what will happen is it will help facilitate release of melatonin to signal you that it's time to go to bed. Tip number 5, avoid going to bed overly full or on an empty stomach. If you go to bed on an empty stomach, what usually happens is you will be hungry, and this can be stimulating for the body and for the brain. Avoid going to bed on a full stomach because again, this is a cue that it's time to be awake as opposed to being asleep. Also, you're digesting food, your core body temperature increases. And what typically happens when we're asleep is that we have a drop in our core body temperature. And so if you're digesting food, your core body temperature is going to be elevated. And this is, again, a signal that it's time to be awake and not asleep. And so another important tip is to have your bedroom be very cool, around 67 degrees, to sort of mimic the core body temperature cooling down. So you want to be cool, you don't want to be hot, you don't want to go to bed on a full stomach, and you also don't want to go to bed on an empty stomach. And then the 6th tip is avoid caffeine and alcohol before bedtime. Caffeine, the way caffeine works to keep us awake is that it blocks the sleep chemical that I spoke about, adenosine. It blocks the adenosine receptors. So it prevents you from sleeping because it blocks the receptors that adenosine binds to cause you to feel sleepy. So it will decrease your sleep drive. It will decrease the sleep pressure that builds up the longer you're awake. And caffeine might actually take a while to metabolize out of your system, depending on the individual. Some people metabolize caffeine quicker than others, but caffeine can be found in your system even after 12 hours of consuming caffeine. So if you're someone who has difficulty falling asleep, difficulty if you have insomnia, then I typically like to recommend staying away from caffeinated beverages, not just coffee, but anything that's caffeinated, sometimes chocolates, and certain energy drinks, certain drinks have caffeine and you don't even know that they have caffeine in them until you read the label. So stay away from caffeine, particularly if you are someone who has difficulty falling asleep. If you're someone who doesn't have difficulty falling asleep, try to limit your caffeine to up to the afternoon, midday, and stop yourself from drinking it after that. Another thing that caffeine does is it decreases our deep sleep. So the slow wave sleep, it decreases what percentage of our sleep is spent in this deep sleep. Alcohol, I've tried to avoid alcohol a couple of hours before bedtime. Um, Make sure that it's metabolized out of your system before you go to sleep. And the reason for that is even though alcohol has sedating effects, some people might drink alcohol and say it helps me fall asleep. But what we know is that alcohol actually changes our sleep architecture. So it suppresses REM. It suppresses REM sleep. And then once alcohol is metabolized out of your system, so let's say you drank alcohol close to bedtime, you went to sleep very quickly, and then once the alcohol is metabolized out of your system, what will happen is you might actually wake up from sleep and have difficulty falling back asleep. When you do fall back asleep, you're going to have something called REM rebound. So the REM that was suppressed during the first half of sleep will shift into the second half of sleep. And what typically happens is people will have very weird dreams. They might wake up feeling terrible. They might wake up actually feeling unrefreshed. And this is because REM sleep is actually a very light stage of sleep. So try to avoid alcohol close to bedtime and also try to avoid caffeine close to bedtime, particularly if you have difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. Okay, and then my final tip is exercise. So exercise, some exercise is better than no exercise at all. What we know is that exercise does improve sleep satisfaction. It improves the amount of deep sleep that we have. It increases our sleep drive and also increases our deep sleep. So if you want to increase your deep sleep, usually I have people come into the office showing me apps from their phone that measures their light sleep and deep sleep, and they say I have very little light sleep. And what I like to say is, I have very little deep sleep. And what I like to say is deep sleep is the smallest percentage of sleep that we have, but there are other things that you can do to increase your deep sleep, and one of them is exercising. So exercising is very, very important. But what to note is that if you exercise too close to bedtime, it can actually be stimulating. Okay, it can actually increase your sympathetic drive. Your sympathetic nervous system will be revved up. So if you do want to exercise, try doing so before bedtime. Some people exercise and then go to sleep right away. Try to go to sleep right away, and sometimes this can be alerting. So my advice is, know yourself, be very mindful. If you're someone who finds that you have difficulty falling asleep and you're someone who also exercises close to bedtime, then maybe you might want to move the time that you exercise maybe to the morning or some other time of the day. So, I hope this talk was very helpful. It's very short, but I'm going to end here. And if you have any questions, I am happy to answer.
Thank you, Dr. Abavana. I have accumulated a few questions from throughout the presentation. So I know one that was most frequently asked, even during registration, was some of the best ways to fall asleep back, or how, sorry, I have some feedback. The best ways to fall back asleep after waking up in the middle of the night.
Yes. So there are a lot of people who have this experience where you wake up around 3 o'clock, 2 o'clock at night, and then you have difficulty falling asleep. The general rule is that if you are unable to sleep in about 20 minutes, you have to get out of bed. About 20 to 30 minutes, get out of bed. Now it sounds almost counterintuitive. The reason why this is the recommendation is that if you stay in bed, so let's say you wake up at night and you're staying in bed and you can't sleep, you're forcing yourself to sleep. You're lying there, you're forcing yourself to sleep. What happens over time is that your brain develops a habit. It develops a habit of waking up and expecting not to sleep. It develops a habit of waking up and doing other things like worrying. So usually when people have difficulty falling back asleep, if you ask them, do you have any things going on in your mind? Do you have a lot of mental rumination? The answer is usually yes. It's like they can't quiet their mind. All the things that happened during the day are replayed, and the things that you forgot to do during the day, all of a sudden you remember them, and you're playing it over and over and over again in your head. So the rule is get out of bed in about 20 to 30 minutes if you're not sleeping. So you're not staring at the clock, but you kind of know when sleep is coming and when it's not coming. So if you feel that sleep is not coming, get out of bed, go into the living room. Don't turn on the television. Don't do anything that's stimulating. What I like to recommend is if you are someone who has a lot of mental chatter, it's good to have a worry journal. So when you get out of bed and you have all these thoughts running through your mind, you pick up your journal and you write them down. You write your thoughts down. It doesn't matter what's running through your head, just write it down. And what you're doing is taking your worries off the mind and onto paper. Then you clear your mind to be able to go back to sleep. When you clear your mind, you can say to yourself, I have all my thoughts on this paper. I don't need to go in bed and worry about these problems. When I wake up in the morning, I can pick back up and worry, continue to think about the things that I was thinking about now. So this frees the mind and allows you to go back to sleep. But the general rule and most important rule is to get out of bed if you can't sleep in 20 minutes. So you don't create an association between your bed and not sleeping. So you break that habit of waking up every day around the same time and not being able to sleep. Do the worrying in the living room. So when you hit your bed or when you wake up in the middle of the night, your brain automatically knows that as long as I'm in bed, it's time for me to go back to sleep and not to worry and not to struggle to sleep. Because if you struggle to sleep, if you try to force sleep, you have the opposite effect. I hope that helps to answer that question.
That was super helpful. Thank you. I have a few more. So another recurring question was about melatonin and how it helps and if it hurts sleep at all.
So melatonin is, like I mentioned earlier, a natural hormone that we all produce. Usually it's released around 2 hours before our habitual bedtime. We all produce it. There are things that can suppress melatonin, such as light, The older we get, however, the amount of melatonin we produce also decreases. So in older individuals, maybe midlife to elderly, um, if you're someone in particular who has difficulty falling asleep, you find that you're more of a night owl, you like to go to bed late and wake up late, melatonin can help advance your sleep-wake phase. So yes, it does help. It does help certain individuals. I would like to say if you're young and healthy, and it doesn't always help because you produce melatonin anyway. But for individuals who are a little bit older, I say it's okay to take it. The trick, however, is that you don't take a lot of it. Just a little bit of melatonin goes a long way. The problem, though, is when you buy melatonin in the stores, the amount of melatonin, because it's not FDA regulated, the amount of melatonin varies between brand to brand. So you can have one brand that has very little melatonin, and you can have another brand that has extremely more melatonin than it says. So there's a lot of variability between the different brands. So again, if you take melatonin, just make sure it's a little bit of melatonin, around zero point 0.5 to 3 milligrams of melatonin, and that usually goes a long way. Also, because melatonin is a hormone that's produced during darkness. When you take melatonin, it has to be taken appropriately. It has to be taken when you have to mimic darkness. So you have to turn up the lights, you have to dim the lights in the house, you have to turn up a lot of stimulation, and that's when it works. And it usually works maybe 2 hours before bedtime is when you take melatonin. You don't take it right away, right at bedtime. You take about an hour to 2 hours before bedtime, and it usually helps. Um, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
That was perfect. Thank you. Another question that we had in the chat was, what happens if you work nights? And can you trick your body into sleeping during the day or transitioning from night shift to day shift or vice versa?
So, shift work is problematic because you are sleeping when you're supposed to be awake, and you're awake when you're supposed to be sleeping. And so some tips that can help is when you get off work and it's light outside, it's a lot of light outside, what you want to do is to limit your exposure to light. So if you're leaving work and you're going home to go to sleep, you want to limit your exposure to daylight. So if you have sunglasses, you can wear your sunglasses on your drive home. When you do get home, try to have, again, a routine because the brain loves routines. So you want to have a routine before bedtime. You want to make sure that your room is pitch black. Maybe you don't have light coming in from the outside. You want to make sure that there's not a lot of ambient noise. So if you live close to a major street, or if there's a lot of noise outside, you can wear earplugs, you can use a noise machine. And you want to make sure your sleep environment is cool, that it's not hot. So you want your sleep environment to be around 65 to 67 degrees. Sometimes melatonin helps because it's the circadian rhythm. Your circadian rhythm is off. You're sleeping when you're not supposed to. So when you get home during your wind down routine, you can take some melatonin, maybe an hour before bedtime, and that can also help. As far as transitioning from the night shift, from day shift to night shift, the number one goal is to make sure that you're getting adequate sleep when you actually sleep. Sometimes if you nap right before you go to work, so if you're someone who works at nights, right before you go to work, you take a small nap, usually 15 to 20 minutes, can help you feel awake at night, because this is a time where you're supposed to be naturally asleep. If you sleep, take a short nap, it can remove the sleep chemical adenosine from the brain, allowing you to be more awake and alert while you're at work.
Perfect. Another one, here's another one that someone asked was, is there a way to make up sleep deprivation? For example, not enough sleep for a day or two and then getting extra sleep on the weekend.
So sleep serves a function, right? So in order to get the full, so yes and no is the answer. So no, in the sense that if you didn't have enough sleep today, okay, the benefits that you would get from a full night's rest, you won't get those benefits back if you try to make it up, during the weekend. So for example, if you're an athlete, right, and you're learning, you're training for a particular sport, we know that N2 sleep is important for building muscle memory, maintaining muscle memory. So when you go to sleep, you're able to integrate the memories, and you're going to be able to function better the next day. You can't make that up on the weekends. But what you can make up is clearing of this adenosine that builds up. So, for example, if you're sleep deprived on the weekday and you're not getting enough time in bed, the sleep chemical that causes you to be sleepy does build up, and you need adequate sleep to clear this chemical out of the brain. And so if you catch up on your sleep, or you try to make up for your sleep on the weekend, you can successfully clear this adenosine out of the brain and start with a new or a clean slate. However, the benefits that you would have gotten if you had slept adequately throughout the week, you might not necessarily be able to make that up on the weekend. So it is important to get enough sleep every single day. Obviously, there's night to night variability. You might have a good night here and there, a bad night here and there. But it is important to sort of get the required amount of sleep, which is 7 to 9 hours for adults. And if you, obviously there's life situations where you just can't get enough sleep on the weekdays, and if you have to sleep more on the weekends, then that's what you have to do. It's better than not sleeping at all. So it's better than not trying to make up your sleep.
Perfect. All right, we have time for a few more questions. Another one was, someone asked about, do you have any recommendations for good pillows?
I know.
All right, next one was, how, do you have an idea on how, oh, sorry, I'm getting some feedback. Let me just, there we go. If there is a way that how narcolepsy impacts the sleep cycle, or any key takeaways for people with narcolepsy and how that impacts. Oh, let me unmute your, there you go. The question was how narcolepsy impacts the sleep cycle in people with narcolepsy.
Okay. Narcolepsy is a condition where the boundaries between your sleep are so there is impairment in that boundaries between your sleep and also your wakefulness, between the different stages of sleep and also between sleep and wakefulness. So you know how we have the different stages of sleep. You have REM sleep and you have non-REM sleep and you have wakefulness. In narcolepsy, there is orexin is a chemical in the brain that sort of monitors these boundaries. orexin is deficient in people who have narcolepsy. And so what happens is your sleep boundaries are not sharp. So what happens will be people who have narcolepsy get very sleepy during the day. And the reason for that is that sleepiness intrudes into wakefulness. And your sleep at night isn't very refreshing because it's fragmented, because wakefulness intrudes into sleep. And also, REM sometimes intrudes into non-REM. So you may have dreaming a little bit earlier. You may have um, um, muscle paralysis that happens during REM sleep, during stage 1 sleep. So your sleep architecture and your sleep and wake periods are, the lines between them is sort of blurred in narcolepsy. And so people tend to get very sleepy during the day and tend to fall asleep at inappropriate times. So if you have narcolepsy, you definitely need to be under the care of a sleep specialist. People who have narcolepsy, naps work very well for them. And so if you're very sleepy, if you can get a short, quick nap, that is usually, people who have narcolepsy will usually feel refreshed after short naps. And so that can be something you can sort of implement during the day. If maybe at work, you might want to set aside 15 minutes during your lunch break to take a quick nap that will help you feel awake for the afternoon. So you can take short, quick naps, and that can help. So the excessive daytime sleepiness that comes with narcolepsy, there's also other things that come with narcolepsy that I think you might have to talk to your sleep physician about and be under care of your sleep physician, because there are a lot of medications that can be used to help you.
Perfect, thank you. Another one was, is there any way to measure your personal needs?
Can you say that one more time? Can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, so a few questions.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Based on your typical REM cycles. Oh, I don't know why it can't hear me. Sorry, guys. I don't know why it's not working. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. All right, let's see. Do you have an idea for a good snack to have before bed if you're hungry but don't want to eat something too heavy?
Yes. Maybe so something that doesn't have a lot of carbs, so a little bit of protein sometimes helps. Also maybe like a little piece of chicken, a little piece of turkey, because it has tryptophan, which can sort of help you sleep a little bit better. Cherries have a little bit of melatonin in them that can help you maybe sleep a little bit better. So I think the caveat is that don't eat anything too heavy. Protein is better than carbohydrates. Go for a healthier option. Yeah, that's my maybe a little bit of peanut butter.
That's perfect, thank you. All right, that seems like just about it. Any other questions in the chat for one last All right. All right, I guess that is it. Thank you guys so much, and thank you, Dr. Abavana.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
For those of you still on the call, we will send the questions and some answers and the recorded presentation out to everyone as well. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.